All right, welcome back. We're going to cover some of the exports, and I was just looking at the number of APIs. There's like 26, so I figure I may have to break this down into a number of videos, but we'll see how quickly we can go through this. All right, so the first export function here is IPC Block Type. Now, this is, I think, relatively new to either IPControl 10 or 11, not sure, one of the two. But block types, again, for those who may or may not be familiar, is a way of us flagging that a subnet or a network is used for a specific type, which we refer to block types. And this block type functionality is hierarchical in nature, meaning you can have a high-level block, which we have private, which would be an RSC 1918 block. And then I have four children of this, which effectively make up the VoIP and management and some of the others. Right? So that's how that works. And then what this does then is allows us to do a block type export for those and filter on either a name or the parent name. So what I want to look at here then is, well, let's look at data and see what we get out of this. All right, and so here's the data block type, which then gives us some of that capability. And some of the things you might see out of here, like the ID if you need it for programming or looking at the specific regression policies. Now, if you omit these names, I believe it gives you just everything. So that would be a quick way of getting all of this data out. And then, of course, if you're familiar with the admin and uh, variable manipulation of this, let's do this. And the great thing about PowerShell is then you can save these off, you can repeat them out of there, add them into a different, objects where you want just the ID. We do, property ID. And if I can type it all this morning, I can do a real quick filter here. And we'll do ID equals 10013. We don't get that last terminator there. Okay, so that's what that pulls back. Real simple there. Only pulls the one field back, and of course, real simple idea. But the idea is that once you have those variables, you can manipulate them any way you wish. Okay, so the next one here is the blocks and allowing for different block exports. And I think this particular one I started off with using some of the selectors. And I try to give it to the ability that you can do it by type in this aspect, and then also by status, and then IP address if you know it specifically. You're going to see various exports that have different methods that allowed me to do different things, like supplying a filter to the export utility that allows it to do anding, oring, and combining a number of different fields together. And so you might want to use like query if you want to do that. But if you're just looking for a simple list, the first should do. So in that particular one, we'll go down and we'll check for status, and I want to take a look for all reserved. And I'm just going to do a kind of a global list of everything. And I only have the one here. So this is basically returns a WS child block. And if I wanted to expand this out, I could pull it back into a variable and manipulate it. So let's do block equals, and then block child block would give us then all the details about the child block structure, and then child block subnet policy then gives us the policies. Now, one thing to note about the policies is if you're looking at a in-use deployed subnet, you might allocate things like the gateway, or you might look at other things. As a matter of fact, let's go look at that and see. Now, subnet is S selection. I have a lot. Let's do 192.168.4.0, and we should get that back. So let's do this. All right, and so here's an example. So as you're adding IP addresses or doing things, you can then say, go out and get the subnet details. And in the subnet details, pull out the subnet policy for the host. And in that policy, I identify like the default gateway, the forward domains, and other attributes and parameters that might help you along the way, or your client, customer, or user along the way as well. Okay. Now, kind of using that same syntax there, when we look at this with the query, this is then expecting a quoted string, and we might want to say, I think we can do block equals 192.168.4. This has to be in a single quote. I'm going to show you this. I think that'll do. Let's try it. And let's give it a status. All right. Yep, so it did. So here's a block here as well. And that would be basically the block syntax that it's looking for from a selector in the API. So now here's where I'm going to just kind of reference this real quick. When you're looking at the exports, all of these commands that I'm using are init export commands or export functions. And I'm calling them like for init export child block. What this then does, and the way you want to use this documentation, I think I've done a video or two on this, is these selectors are what we're supplying in the query. And this effectively becomes like a SQL query, almost exactly, that gets passed into the API as a query to pull back the results. And you have these options to do this. You then do have comparison capabilities for equals, ands, contains, ends, and other. And then you have strings that are single quoted, and then you have things like our values that are going to be non-quoted. And these are effectively all of the different selectors in the latest version of 11 that you can do any type of search and filtering on. Now we also can do user-defined fields as well. So if I wanted to do, user-defined field, and let's do VLAN ID equals 1111, and UDF API enabled equals on. Let's see if this will give us anything. That one did not. So let me get this out of there. Let's try this one now. Okay, so here then it gave me back 2 child blocks. So in the array, if I look at this, this then becomes an array structure. That as you type it out, it'll type out both of them, and then you could do just simple child block, and this will then expand out each of the child block structure. And therefore, you don't have to qualify. It just kind of does it as a global and enumerates through the various data elements. Now, I also have out here the query UDF tags, so that what we kind of need to do along the way as developers in this, we need to know what user-definable fields are available to the API for the subnet and or for the IP device specifically. And so what I'm doing here then is we use that same block structure. So if I do the same thing, I think that will work. Should give me the user-defined fields that the application supports for the subnet level device or for the subnet itself. I can go out and call on these API user-defined fields. And or when I get down to the device, I can do the same thing. It's pretty simple and very useful to do, and it's just a string array. And then we have also then the child blocks by container. So if I want to go out and export by a container itself and all of the blocks and then their status, I can do that. So let's do this. And if there's any free blocks in there, I can tell it to do the same. And then I default to v4, and then you'll get an array of these again. And if I just kind of up arrow key from this and put a variable on it, I can take a look at this. This name variable I have to replace. And then blocks, child block, same thing again. And then we can do other searches and queries using the standard syntax. All right, let's keep going. And IPC containers, again, the ability to grab that data, our data, and to apply filters if you want. And if not, then just to tell it to give you everything back. And this would give you all of the containers, their policies, and everything you would need to manipulate that if you wanted to modify or delete or anything like that. Right? Same thing with IP devices. As we store IP addresses in here, you can search and filter out by address type. So what I've done is I've done this for you, where you don't have to guess. It's like all static devices are here. And then I can just tell it to run, if I've got all the mandatory, and you'll get a list of all IPs. So I don't think you should do that on a busy server. The default is 100 rows, and you can, of course, change that if you want to limit it to others. Now, the other things here is where I am building in some of the selectors. I'm going to go back and I believe all of these exports should have all the selectors. So I'm going to add those in. And what they'll appear in this particular ISE is you'll show things like the comparison. So if I was doing a wildcard search and I wanted to say, the search for ATL, and I could say its name contains, and there's nothing out there, so I don't have one. So let's do this, 192.168. I don't even have that either. So let's try this. Okay, so there's the ATL VO. So by searching on that, showing IP addresses by that container, or searching. So there's a lot of capabilities that you can extract the data, and the idea is that you can filter down using all of the available selectors, and then things like hardware address. Using this API to simply get all the IP addresses that have a hardware address of a certain prefix, like router, switches, servers, and then tell it to return all the manufacturers. Very easy to use, and that's what that's designed for. Now the other exports here, IP device by subnet, again, real simple, and we're telling it either the block name or the IP address, and I'll do same thing here. I don't think I have anything in that one, not on that one either. Let's do, all right, so there we go. So then you can do it by, the block name, or, by its IP address, but I'm curious why I didn't get that. I may have to go fix something there. Ah, no, there you go. So the IP address expects an IP that exists or within the range that'll tell you what the available subnet is. So if you knew the IP address, but not necessarily the subnet, this might be something like, 55, and that'll then tell it that it's actually translating back to the subnet. So that's why I did that. Now here's the device UDF. So again, if you're looking at the user definable fields, you can tell it to export by its field name. And so what I've got here is export devices by a specific field. And I'm going to use, let's see if I can think of one that's set, API transaction ID. I think that was there. Yeah, there you go. So these are all the IP addresses through my portal that built in, and it puts in this API transaction. So I know those exist. So that's one example of user-defined fields. You might have others like point of contact, emails, things like that. Okay, so let's see if I can get down to, I have a lot of device stuff here. So let me, I'm going to stop at this video at 12, almost 13 minutes, and I'm going to start up another one, and we'll pick up and continue just to keep this manageable. Thanks, everybody. See you in the next video.